Meantime, crypto investors and policymakers gathering in Jackson Hole this week for the second annual Wyoming Blockchain Symposium. It's hosted by Salt and Kraken. And joining us right now, first on CNBC, Anthony Scaramucci, founder and managing partner of SkyBridge Capital. Smart to do this almost as a shoulder event to Fed Chair Jay Powell.
That was the plan. Andrew. And interestingly enough, under the Biden administration, no Fed officials accepted the invitation last year. But under the Trump administration, we've got 3 or 4 of them, including Fed Governor Waller, coming. So we're very excited about that. We've got a gathering of about 500 people, but lots of C-suite people here. So we're hoping to make this an annual event.
You just mentioned one of the names that may be a potential Fed chair. Before we get into the crypto side of things, do you have a take on the next Fed chair? We just had Scott Besson on. He said he's going to be conducting interviews post-Labor Day with a group that may be as many as 11 right now, but it sounds like some of the guests that are at your event may be on that list.
Well, I think there might be 1 or 2, but I'm really, to me, I obviously outside of that decision-making authority. And, listen, I mean, President Trump picked Jerome Powell 8 years ago. I think the chairman did generally a very good job. It's an imperfect process, of course. I'm not saying that mistakes weren't made, but I think he's done a generally good job. And I expect the president to pick another good Fed chair when the time comes.
Well, you're long Bitcoin. No wonder you love him, Matt.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Anthony. Interestingly, a dovish chair is good for your business. Is good for crypto, right?
Well, listen, I want the mama bear chair. I don't necessarily think a dovish chair is good, because if you get an overheating in inflation, you're going to disrupt all of the ways that we consume. We're going to disrupt the housing market, which you guys were just talking about. I would prefer mama bear. I think Bitcoin specifically is going to be fine in any scenario, but I like the mama bear Fed. So hopefully the president will pick the mama bear.
How are you thinking about Bitcoin right now? We're looking at the price tag right about $115,000. We've had conversations probably when Bitcoin was at $15,000. Right now, in your mind, what's the window? What's the base case, and how high can it go from here?
Well, I mean, listen, there's been pain and euphoria in the Bitcoin markets over the last 5 years. I think what's happening now is lots of consolidation and institutional adoption. So if you went to a conference like this 3 years ago, it was mostly retail investors and CEOs working in the layer 1 blockchain space. Today, it's lots more institutional investors. So that's finally starting to happen. If you look at the numbers on something like the BlackRock ETF, the IBIT ETF, you can see now, Andrew, there's lots of institutions coming in. So what's interesting is that some of the whales have been selling. So I know I've seen your interviews with Michael Novogratz and the 80,000 Bitcoins that sold last month. And so there's a consolidation story happening. There's a change of ownership story happening. But I think we're going higher. Just because you just look at the math, there's just way more demand than issued supply of Bitcoin or, existing overall supply in the marketplace. So we still maintain our price target between 180 and 200,000 by year end. And I think that's a cautious price target, by the way. I think there are people that are way above us, those levels. But I just think it's a function of buying and only 450 Bitcoins being made by the network per day.
How do you feel about buying Bitcoin directly these days versus folks buying ETFs versus folks buying, some of the products that Michael Saylor is selling, for example?
Well, listen, I mean, they're all linked to Bitcoin, IBIT being the purest link to Bitcoin. I think what Michael has done is absolutely extraordinary, as evidenced by all of the copycats that are out there. And again, not just copycats for Bitcoin, but for Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, and others. And so, it's different strokes for different folks. Michael, you're probably getting a little bit more of a kick to your Bitcoin exposure. IBIT, I think it's a pure play, and I would just point out that places like JP Morgan will actually lend on IBIT. And so it's a very secure asset that people trust. I own a lot of Bitcoin and hold it in storage, Andrew, for myself and for SkyBridge. And so there's different, different ways to approach it. I think the institutions will likely go into the ETFs. And of course, there's a lot of institutions that, quote unquote, can't own Bitcoin, that they end up owning Michael stock or synthetics like that.
And where do you land right now in the stablecoin arena? We've had Mr. Allaire on recently from Circle. That's really the way people are playing that in the public market at this moment. But there's a whole bunch of new stablecoin companies coming into the public market. And I keep wondering sort of how that all shakes out longer term. That feels different to me than what's happening with either Bitcoin as a currency or Ethereum or whatnot.
Well, I mean, and also the state of Wyoming is announcing this morning
Yes.
their own stable coin. So you can add that to the mix as well. Congratulations to the state. I just think that that's generally good. I share Secretary Besson's view of this, that's generally good for the U.S. dollar. It means, more treasuries, more short-term treasuries, demand for those securities. But I also think it's going to bring a wave of technological innovation. We, at our last conference in Bermuda, we did a drop of stable coins into people's phones where they could spend, I guess it was $100 at the different tourist shops on Front Street in Bermuda, and it worked beautifully. And I think you're going to get to the point where we're transacting using stable coins. It may bypass some of the credit card fees and some of the other ancillary third-party confirmation fees that we've charged historically in the marketplace. So I generally think it's very good. I think those companies will consolidate. And I think one of the discussions here at the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium is going to be about a central bank digital currency. And I stand with President Trump on that. I don't think we need that. I think it could be, from a libertarian perspective, too intrusive from a privacy matter. And I think the private companies are doing a great job in this area. And so I'd like to just stay in the private company realm as it relates to dollar-based stablecoins.
The piece I can't figure out in this context on the stablecoins is, if everybody's playing in this, how much margin is there really, right? And therefore, in the stablecoin arena.
Well, remember, they're not allowed, because if you look at the last legislation, there's no yield on the stable coins, Andrew. So if you're converting dollars into a stable coin, there's going to be a spread there for those guys naturally. I don't think the competition is going to impact that, unless we switch up that yield mechanism.
Let me ask you a different question, and maybe it's a political question, but it's a business question. You obviously had your couple of minutes in the Trump.
I never talk politics, Andrew. That's, I'm not.
You never talk politics.
Not in politics anymore. But go ahead. I can take a political question.
He tweets it. He podcasts it. He does all of that. I'm just curious if you just weigh in on this sort of larger industrial policy question in terms of the way the country's moving. We're talking about Intel. We were talking about NVIDIA earlier and the AMD deal, and whether you look at all of this and you think of it as, a very positive, affirmative approach, the way the country should be dealing with these things, or you look at them as shakedowns for corporate leaders. Which one is it these days for you?
I'm developing such a good relationship with Joe Kernan. I almost don't want to answer the question, but I am going to answer the question, Andrew. I'm not in love with about.
We don't love everything. We don't love everything, but we certainly didn't vote for Kamala, or at least speaking for myself.
Okay,
anyway,
let him answer the question.
All right. Well, I'm going to answer the question. I appreciate surgical tariffs where we need to protect our private companies against government-sponsored companies overseas that are dumping into our markets. So I'm all about that. Okay. I don't like the massive macro tariffs. I think they're long-term damaging. I think the companies have exhausted their ability to absorb the prices of those tariffs, and they get passed on to the consumer, Andrew. So
Anthony,
ultimately,
I got to thank you.
It's going to disrupt the economy.